Ave Maria Stella.
There we go. We got the 1 second. Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I'm your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I'm a priest of the Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network on sqpn.com. Today we're covering Sacrosanctum Concilium, paragraphs 1 through 4 on the liturgy as the work of redemption. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. So yesterday we talked to Father Lang, and he talked to us all about the summary of Sacrosanctum Concilium, this document on the liturgy, right? That's what Sacrosanctum Concilium is. And today we're going to start reading it, right? And so the first thing we have here is that the liturgy makes Christ present. That's one of the things we're going to talk about a lot. And here in this first part, there is a lot about what we call anamnesis. Sometimes you'll hear zikron. Anamnesis is the Greek term, zikron being the Hebrew term. And it means a memory that makes what we remember present. And that's what we talk about in the Eucharistic prayer when we make Jesus present. It's an anamnesis. There's even part of the Eucharistic prayer we're remembering that's called the anamnesis. So that's an important principle here, is that when we remember, when we represent the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus in the Eucharist, we make it present. We don't just kind of remember it like I can remember a football game or something like that. No, we make it present. So for most of these, this is the first time I'm doing the paragraphs, I'm generally going to read each paragraph individually and then comment. For this day, for paragraphs 1 through 4, paragraph 2 is by far the biggest, so it will get the most time because it's the biggest, and it's the most important too. So if we move on to paragraph 1, we see the goal of the council is to increase Christian life, right? So let's get to the text of what this paragraph says. So I'm going to read it here, and then we'll make a short commentary. This sacred council has several aims in view. It desires to impart an ever-increasing vigor to the Christian life of the faithful. It also desires, in that sense, to adapt more suitably the needs of our times and those institutions which are subject to change, to foster whatever can promote a union among those who believe in Christ, and to strengthen whatever can help to call the whole of mankind to the household of the Church. The council therefore sees particularly cogent reasons for understanding the reform and promotion of the liturgy, right? So it is seeing all these modes, right, all these 4 goals, and it sees the liturgy and changing and promoting the liturgy as one of the means to get that goal. That's what paragraph 1 is telling us, right? What are those 4 goals? That more vigor in Christian life, the needs of our times, that times and places changes, the union with Christ, the union of believers, and then strengthening Christian unity. All who call the whole of mankind the household of the Church, right? We are all called to be members of the Church. We are saved through the Church. And we have to remember when we're talking about this reform, it's in the hermeneutic of continuity. Hermeneutic just means a way to interpret, and continuity is the way we do it. So it's not just like, oh, we have a totally new thing. No, this is within the continuity of the Church. And that concept will come back a few times as we go through it. I think we talked about it a little bit with Dr. Fastigi when we did that interview. So moving on to paragraph 2. Paragraph 2 is really about the Eucharist bringing us Jesus. And it goes back to this anamnesis, the zikron. And it's not just a memory, but it is making present. It's a memory that makes present. So let's read it. We're going to read it in 3 parts, 1 sentence really each one. The Vatican II documents tend to have long sentences because, I don't know, that's the way that church documents often are. It's just life. And so the sentences are like 3-4 lines at a time. But anyways, let's go with the first sentence here. For the liturgy, through which the work of our redemption is accomplished, most of all in the divine sacrifice of the Eucharist, is outstanding means which by the faithful may express in their lives and manifest as the mystery of Christ and the real nature of the Church, right? So this goes back to Henry de Lubac, who was one of the theological experts of the council, famous theologian of the 20th century. And he had this phrase, the Church makes the Eucharist and the Eucharist makes that Church, right? The union of the Eucharist and the Church. And this is what it's referred to in the Eucharist being accomplished in Christ's name. John Paul II, in his Ecclesia de Eucharistia, his encyclical on the Eucharist, paragraph 26, paraphrases de Lubac and then adds, it follows there's a profound relationship between the two. So much that we can apply to the Eucharist mystery the very words with which, in the Nicene-Constantinople Creed, we profess the Church to be one holy Catholic and Apostolic. So that idea that the Eucharist itself is one holy Catholic and Apostolic, and the Eucharist is that presence, that full presence in the Eucharist. The Church is most fully in the liturgy, right? That union of Christ in the Eucharist, Christ the bride. And this also is in the Catechism. If you read the section on the Eucharist, one of the first paragraphs is paragraph 1324. And has that famous line we've probably all heard before, but it's actually saying Lumen Gentium of Vatican II, which also says it. We'll talk about that later on in the year. And it's the Eucharist is the source and summit of Christian life, right? So this is really the mystery at the center of our lives. The Eucharist is that mystery at the center of our lives as Christians. And the Vatican Council, in the second paragraph, where it's talking about the liturgy, wants to make this very clear for us. So let's move on to the second part of paragraph 2. It is the essence of the Church that she be both human and divine, visible and yet invisibly equipped, eager to act and yet intent on contemplation, present in the world and yet not at home in it. And she is all these things in such ways that that the human is directed and subordinate to the divine, the visible likewise the invisible, action and contemplation, and this present world to the city of yet to come, which we seek, right? So there's this tension in Christian life. We know Jesus is going to win in the end, but the battle's still to come. We have this already victory. We have the already in heaven, but we know something is still to come with this, right? So we can enter heaven through the contemplation, but we wait at the end of life, right? I don't know if you've ever had moments where you feel just like you're in heaven in prayer sometimes. It's not going to be happening every day, every week, anything like that, but there's a few times in your life you can experience that depth of prayer. But we're waiting for that full union, that full depth in the resurrection of the body at the end of time. And the liturgy brings us the fullness of Jesus to unite with him. Yet we have that full union in the resurrection. It is the resurrection that brings us that full union. And so in this, we also talk about the union of two natures in one person, right? So if we remember, Jesus has a human nature, a divine nature, one person, right? So the liturgy too is human. We have certain words we say, right? I'm celebrating Mass. I have to say certain words that are in the book. But it's divine because Jesus is coming present, because we are praying to God, because we're uniting ourselves to God. It is divine, leading us to heaven, leading us to that fullness in the life to come. So let's get to this last section of paragraph 2. While the liturgy daily builds up those who are within the holy temple of God into a dwelling place for God and the Spirit, to the mature measure of the fullness of Christ, at the same time it marvelously strengthens their power to preach Christ, and thus shows forth the Church to those who are outside as a sign lifted up among the nations, under which the scattered children of God may be gathered together until there is one sheepfold and one shepherd, right? So this is this idea of Christ coming powerfully to us, bringing us in union, right? We have the Word and the Eucharist. Here they're talking about, right, the Holy Temple and those things, and receive him fully. We have to remember, as we talk about the Mass, we have two parts: the liturgy of the Word, up to the offertory of the gifts, bringing the gifts forward, and then the liturgy of the Eucharist. So we receive him fully in the Eucharist, we receive him in his Word, and we receive him in the Eucharist as well. So paragraphs 3 and 4 are a little shorter. They're practical, not just theoretical. And I'm just going to read all of them and then do a little bit of commentary. There's not nearly as much commentary on this, because paragraph 2 was really giving us that idea of like, here is what the reality is. And paragraph 3 and 4 is outside of that theory back to the practical, right? So I'm going to read it here. Wherefore the Sacred Council judges that the following principles concerning the promotion and reform of the liturgy should be called to mind, and the practical norms should be established, right? So practical norms. Among these principles and norms, there are some which can and should be applied both to the Roman rite and also the other rites. The practical norms which follow, however, should be taken as applying only to the Roman rite, except for those which, in the very nature of things, affect the other rites as well. I'll mention the other rites when I do the commentary afterwards, what is meant by that, if you're not sure what the distinction is between Roman and other rites. Lastly, in faithful obedience to the tradition, the Sacred Council decrees that Holy Mother Church holds all lawfully acknowledged rites to be of equal right and dignity. She wishes to preserve them in the future and foster them in every way. The Council also desires that, where necessary, the rites be revised carefully in the light of sound tradition. They give a new vigor to meet circumstances and needs of modern times, right? So this is bringing change to the liturgy, but it's bringing change in accord with tradition. It's not denying the tradition. This is this idea of continuity I mentioned beforehand, right? And so this is the other thing. So when we talk about rites here, like the Roman rite, or we might talk about the Maronite Ukrainian rite, things like that, we're using the word R-I-T-E, R-I-T-E, right? Which just comes from this idea of ritual, the exact structure of the liturgy. If I go to Ukrainian Catholic Church, that the Eucharist present, but the exact order of what they would call the divine liturgy, we would call Mass or Eucharistic celebration, is a little different. And the same with the Maronites. But they're all fully Catholic. They're all in union with the Pope. They're all living spiritually in union with Jesus in that sense. The Roman Rite is, I think, about 99% of Catholics. So that's what most of the listeners, I assume, are. That's what I am. I'm a Roman Rite priest. And usually, if you're not sure, just assume it's Roman Rite within Roman Catholicism, unless you're in Ukraine or Lebanon, where Maronites are, a few other places where other rites might predominate. There are a few other changes beyond the ritual of the liturgy in different things like how they have religious life and things like that. But this is not the place to do that. We will go into it a little later in the Orientalum Ecclesiarum, which is in about 3 months. We'll cover that later on in this podcast, where we will go through that document, which really is on those other rites. I have a decent amount of experience with Ukrainian Catholics, and up at Madonna House in Canada, they have a divine liturgy once a month, and I was there for that. And divine liturgy being like their version of the Mass, and they follow kind of a Russian, but the Russian Ukrainian are, as far as once they're translated to English, are basically the same. The differences you're looking at are very, very minor, like whether you hold 3 or 4 fingers in your hand when you do a certain ritual or some things like that. So the focus is going to be the Roman Rite here. Now, the other rites have to work out it afterwards. And also, this is meant to be practical, not just theoretical, because that paragraph 2 is really giving us that theory, that kind of high thing. Look, here's the liturgy. Here's Jesus. Here's what's coming. But here they're saying, hey, we're also going to make practical application. This is also going to change the daily liturgy of different people. So hopefully this helped you understand Sacrosanctum Concilium 1 through 4. Thank you for listening to this podcast, this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you could donate to help StarQuest produce this and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue on Sacrosanctum Concilium. We're going to cover paragraphs 5 through 6 on the eternal origin of the liturgy, that origin in God himself. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which should be a blueprint for the Catholic Church. You can go to sqpn.com/Vatican, my own website, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X/Twitter for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan.